Okay, hello. We're back doing research. Since I last did this morning, I've had a paper accepted, so I'm very happy. And so I'm celebrating by going back to research. And so this is just stuff on a topic that I've published on and hope to keep publishing on. And Gil Hirsch sent this to me. He's my co-author on this stuff that we're writing, and so I want to keep up on the topic, so I'm reading this, the latest thing. It's a common thought that our experience of self and time plays a crucial role in living a good human life. The idea is seen both in views that say we must think of our lives as temporally extended wholes to live well, and those that say living well requires living in the moment. These opposing views share the assumption that a person's interest must be identified with either a temporally extended or temporally local perspective. David Vettelman has argued that both perspectives are necessarily part of human experience, and each has its own independent interests. I agree with Vettelman that our experience is inherently multi-perspectival, but argue that there are more than two relevant perspectives and reject the claim that these perspectives have independent interests. Expanding his metaphor of narrative, I describe the way in which these perspectives continuously influence and affect one another, and suggest that living well can be understood in terms of skillful management of the perspectives that make up this complex form of temporal self-experience. Okay. It's a common thought that our experience of ourselves and time plays a crucial role in living a good human life. The idea is expressed, for instance, by those who believe that living a good life requires us to experience ourselves as diachronically extended, focusing on the whole of our lives and determining how best to act. Call this the whole life approach. It's also expressed by those who hold that life is best lived in the moment and that we should endeavor to put the past and future out of play as much as we can, focusing only on now. Call this the live for today approach. While these two approaches are diametrically opposed in their advice of how to live well, they share two important assumptions. First, that humans can and do take two distinct temporal perspectives on their lives, that of the present and that of their life as a whole. And second, that living well requires subordination of one of these perspectives to the other. In his influential paper, Well-Being and Time, David Vettelman denies the second of these assumptions. The temporally extended and temporally local perspectives are, he says, independent and necessary elements of human experience, each with its own interests. We cannot and should not choose one as representing the true interests of the person, but must instead recognize the legitimacy of both. While I think Vettelman is right that both temporal perspectives are inherent features of the human selves, I reject his claim that they are entirely independent and question the implications that there are only two relevant temporal perspectives within life. I also offer an alternative way of thinking about the good life for a person in terms of an interplay among multiple temporal perspectives. Section 1, it provides a brief overview of the dispute between the whole life and live for today approaches and lays out the central argument of well-being and time. Section 2 uses Velleman's central metaphoric narrative to challenge both the idea that human temporal perspective is binary and the claim of strong independence among our temporal perspectives found in his argument. Section 3 develops its challenges, outlining a complex and multidimensional picture of the human temporal self-experience and its relation to the good life. Both the whole life and live for today approaches have appeared in multiple forms throughout human history, and there is important heterogeneity within each approach. Here we need only the broad outlines of each. The whole life approach tends to take one of two basic forms. One focuses on prudential reasoning and the capacity of humans to step back from the poles of the moment to consider the consequences of following these impulses for the overall well-being of their lives as wholes. This allows us to forego smaller pleasures now in favor of greater pleasures later, or to defer the satisfaction of immediate desire to obtain greater satisfaction overall. On this view, the whole life approach takes the form of a theory of rational self-interest. The person is identified with a temporally extended being, and the interest of the person with the interest of the whole. Taking the temporally extended perspective and maximizing the well-being of the whole allows us to live our best lives. Another important version of this approach focuses on the way in which the ability to step back from momentary impulses and think about what we want for our lives overall makes possible the complex plans, projects, commitments, and interpersonal relationships that give human lives depth and meaning. For instance, see Course Guard Wilkes. It argues that, what's the Wilkes? Know thyself. I haven't read that. Let me look it up. Only cited by 20, published back in 1998. This seems interesting. I'm not going to download it right now because it's behind a paywall, but I will circumvent that later. It argues that the activities and relationships we value most, those which give life its richness, require time to undertake them or even to conceive their possibility. We must thus understand ourselves as persistent beings and coordinate our actions over a temporally extended span. The person is again identified with the temporally extended entity, since these plans and projects belong to the extended self. The live for today approach, by contrast, focuses on the way in which identification with the temporally extended perspective can be stifling and constrictive. By focusing on what has happened in the past or what will happen in the future, we fail to be present in our lives as they are occurring. Instead of stopping to smell roses, we are preoccupied with where we're going and where we've been. We can, moreover, become slaves to our plans and projects, losing perspective on whether we still believe in them or they are any longer bringing us joy. As Galen Strawson, a proponent of the live for life for today. Should that be live for today? I think so. Approach puts it, truly happy-go-lucky, see what comes along, lives are among the best there are, vivid, blessed, profound. The same general sentiment can be found many places as part of many traditions of Asian thought, as well as in popularized forms. It's present in works of existentialism and in slogan raising from Carpe Diem to the recent YOLO, missing a hashtag, you only live once. This approach is often connected to the claim of the deep unity of the person over time, as illusory in that identification with the subject inside the subject's interest with temporary local experience leads to less life. In addition to Strawson, see, for example, Perfect. Bellman argues that neither of these approaches can provide a full account of human well-being. His argument turns on showing that well-being in life cannot be reduced to the sum of well-being at its moment, and that momentary well-being cannot be calculated as a fraction of well-being of the life of which it's part. The dispute between whole life and live for today theorists arises because there are two independent sets of interests that each make up a human life, and the legitimate and distinct calculation of well-being connected with each. To show that whole life well-being doesn't reduce to momentary well-being, Bellman asks us to consider two lives with the same absolute sum of pleasure, desire, fulfillment, but different trajectories. One involves a rocky start, followed by hard work, which leads to success and satisfaction. The other starts with privilege and success, but steadily goes downhill, ending in deprivation and disappointment. We are, Bellman says, likely to judge the first life to be better than the second, since by hypothesis there's no difference in the sum of momentary well-being. The difference in welfare between the value between the two lives cannot rest on such a difference, but rather relies on facts about their shape or trajectory, characteristics that apply to life as a whole. The value of a life, thus, he says, is strongly irreducible second-order property. It depends on the overall order or structure of events, on what might be called their narrative or dramatic relations. I'm getting destroyed mentally by the lack of a space between these quotation marks or these periods and these parentheses, and also by the presence of this period and by the location of this period here rather than here. This analysis is mostly an argument against the simple rational self-interest theory that advocates seeking a good life but maximizing the sum of well-being in the moments of that life. It may thus seem to be an argument in favor of the second broad category of whole life approaches described above, which emphasize the role of diachronically extended plans and projects in the good life, a view in which the value of a life inheres in the narrative shape is a version of this kind of view, and so Bellman's account of the goodness of a life does fall into this category. Bellman says further, however, that the goodness of life as a whole doesn't tell us everything about the welfare of a person whose life it is. If we're asking about human welfare and how this is to be maximized, Bellman says the whole life perspective is not the only relevant one. There's also the perspective of the moment, and a person's well-being in each moment is defined from the perspective of that moment. The well-being of each moment is no more a mere abstraction from diachronic welfare than diachronic well-being is a simple sum of momentary well-being. It is, he says, an essential and significant feature of persons that they are creatures who naturally live their lives from the successive viewpoints of individual moments as well as from a comprehensive diachronic point of view. These are distinct perspectives, each of whose well-being must be calculated independently, and the quality of experience from each perspective is part of the individual's welfare. Bellman's case for a momentary perspective as a legitimate viewpoint from which to calculate well-being begins with the observation that we can calculate welfare relative to a particular context in a way that restricts the context within which the calculation is undertaken. The first part of the paper shows how the well-being of a moment cannot simply be added to that of other moments to determine the well-being of life, because in the context of entire life, the significance of the moment and the amount of well-being it contributes can be altered by the narrative shape of life as a whole. Here he emphasizes that the fact that although the significance and quality of a momentary experience may be revised when considered within the context of life, this doesn't alter what was experienced at the moment. My well-being right now does not change because of what happens later, only its contributions to my life story. Momentary well-being is thus not determinable as a fraction of goodness of life, but must be understood within the context of the moment. This might initially seem to lend support to a whole life approach by applying that the full picture of someone's welfare requires a temporally extended perspective. That is a mistake to pursue optimal well-being at the moment, independent of the role of what happens at the moment will play later. This is basically the whole life approach. Bellman denies this, however. The momentary perspective, he says, is despite the short duration, the perspective of an experiencing subject who can care about his own well-being. There's something that's liked for the person at the moment. The momentary subject can be better or worse off, and what happens before will happen hence does not change the quality for the momentary subject now. For this reason, Bellman says a person's synchronic interest strike him as having an independent claim that's not necessarily overridden by that of his diachronic interest. This is because a person himself is both a synchronic and diachronic identity, and so the evaluations of a single moment in someone's life need be less authoritative than those which are relevant to the perspective of his life as a whole. Well-being for Bellman is always relative to the perspective. To a perspective in the momentary self is legitimately understood as the perspective of a subject. By virtue of being who you are, Bellman says you unavoidably occupy successive momentary viewpoints as well as a diachronic one. Just as what's good for the latter viewpoint is good for you as a protagonist of our ongoing life, so what's good for the former viewpoint is good for you as the subject of successive moments within a state. Because of this, the value something has for someone in the restricted context of a single moment in his life is the value that genuinely accrues to him as the subject of that moment, even if interactions with events at other times result in delivering a different value to him in his capacity as the protagonist of an entire life. This is a deep and important result, but its implications for living well are unclear. Bellman emphasizes that his analysis does not involve a defense or attack on a particular count of time preferences, and so does not deliver any immediate position on the dispute between whole life and the for-today approaches. What he defends is only the position that it's characteristic of humans to have two distinct perspectives from which value can be assessed, and that these can be in conflict. This leaves us with a puzzling question about what this looks like both in theory and practice. Bellman's argument for the autonomy of the two sets of interest invokes the idea that human persons have two identities and that any moment there are two subjects of experience, the momentary self and the diachronic self, both of which are somehow me and both of whom I am to identify. It's not entirely clear how I can be both a momentary and diachronically extended one, and even less clear how this dual identification is to be employed in deciding what to do. In some respects, this is not a problem for Bellman. His subject is about how we are to calculate the objective welfare of a person's life, and he makes no direct claim about what stance an individual should take in their own deliberations about how to live. Nonetheless, he is correct in saying that human persons are made up of distinct subjects with legitimate and independent concerns for their well-being. This should have some effect on the principles of choice involved in attempts to live a good life. These effects are worth considering. Doing so will result in challenges to strong independence of the two perspectives claimed by Bellman. There have been several important challenges to. Oh no, this could have been us. I should publish later now. There is several important challenges to Bellman's claims about temporal structure of our experience and implications for well-being. To give a few examples, Bramble argues that there is only lifetime well-being. He not only denies the existence of momentary well-being, as I will in the next section, but more generally the existence of coherent notion of well-being for any period of time shorter than a life. Kapanen argues that we need to think of the self as temporarily instant. Which Kapanen is this? Prudence, sunk cost. God, surely I've read that. Well, it's not in here. I'm like 80% sure I've read this, but just to be safe. We're looking this up on fill papers and so on. The fill papers copy is just a Microsoft Word document. I don't love that. So we go now to the Journal of Moral Philosophy, which is typically behind a paywall. You know what, I'll just let this load in the background. We'll go back to it after I'm done with this stream. Argues that we need to think of the self as temporarily extended in a way that complicates the idea of momentary well-being and argues in the direction of more nuanced version of the second kind of whole life approach described above. Dorsey argues directly that Bellman's observations about the importance of the shape of life can be made compatible with the claim that diachronic welfare can be determined by someone's synchronic welfare. We simply realize that the contributions to synchronic welfare of temporarily discrete events or other goods. Life can be affected by the relations to these temporally discrete goods and bads bear to each other and so forth, although the view I will offer overlaps in some ways with each of these accounts is markedly different from them, coming at the question from a different direction. Unfortunately, space doesn't permit discussion of the points of overlap and difference. If she ever does this, she could also talk about our view. Let's see. Is this loaded yet? Ooh, the Kapanen thing is open access. So I will download. I thought I had read this, but oh, well, I've downloaded it before, 5 months ago. Okay, but I haven't read it. Maybe not. I don't know. The problem before us is to explain how two distinct temporal first-person perspectives can be experienced by a single person. Bellman's emphasis on the role of narrative shape of a life in evaluating diachronic well-being is helpful in helping find such an explanation. The idea that our lives are narrative and structure has been an important part of the philosophical discussion of personal identity, where different proponents of the view have understood this kind of variety of different ways. For Marya Schechtman. Is this her chapter in the book? Yes, it is. I've read that like 20 times. In previous works, I've developed a narrative approach and defended against objections raised by Strawson, connected with the Live Today approach. What's the 2020? Personal identity H and ethical depth. This Journal of Consciousness Studies has some stuff in it. Let's, because I haven't read this for sure. I'm not sure this needs to be in here twice. Okay, back to this thing. Here I wish to emphasize particular features of the broader narrative approach I've taken, focusing on specific similarities with literary narratives. I begin with the idea that engaging a narrative as a narrative requires occupying multiple first-person perspectives at once. Peter Goldie offers a masterful account of how this occurs in both literature and life. To engage a piece of literature, he explains it's necessary to entertain multiple points of view, simultaneously appreciate their distinctiveness and their interactions. In reading a novel, this is something, was it? I think there's something in this article, Moral Judgments and Works of Art, the Case of Narrative Literature by Mary Devereaux, that's similar to this thing, but we're going to put that aside for now. He explains it's necessary, blah, blah, blah. Reading a novel, for instance, is necessary to occupy the perspective of different characters, some who know things that others do not, of the narrator who may or may not be reliable, and of the author all lived together. It creates the reader's experience of the novel. Narrative self-understanding, as in literary narrative, Goldie says there's a distinction between the point of view of the character and the point of view of the narrator, even though they're both in some sense the same person. Someone who's internal to a narrative, having both the character and the narrative, having a role as the character and the narrative, can also be external to it, having also a role of external narrator, he says. This is the case in autobiographical narratives and also not biographical memories, which are narrative form. As an example, he imagines someone relating the story of a meeting. I was humiliated in a meeting the other day, left feeling deeply embarrassed, but now I realize the way I've treated was inappropriate and unfair, and I made very resentful. To have this kind of memory, I need simultaneously to take the perspective of myself in the meeting, feeling the humiliation of the moment, and also to experience the anger I feel from now, where the interaction looks different. There's a juxtaposition of these perspectives that gives the memory the peculiar experiential character it has. James Wood also sees the multiple perspectives found in literature as a fundamental feature of our lives and our self-experience. He talks about the simultaneous omniscience and partiality he finds in literature and in life. Describing this sometimes in terms of temporality, the novel, he says, is constantly moving between secular and religious modes, and the secular mode expands the instance of our lives into scenes and details that strives to run these instances in a rhythm close to real time. The novel's eternal or religious mode reminds us that life is bounded by death, that life is made up of moments. The instances of the present are real and alive and experiences as they happen, but our experience within the context of life that will someday will end. I don't understand the but. What? entiendo. No comprendo. Sorry, I'm gonna move some stuff to your monitor. Okay, the simultaneity of distinct perspectives that occurs in the experience of narrative and life on this picture is not the mysterious juxtaposition of two distinct subjects of experience occupying a single consciousness. It's the structure of the experience itself, the way in which the initial and the local perspectives affect and depend on one another. Of particular significance here is the fact that we experience the present moment as a part of the ongoing story. When we read a novel for the first time, we're not yet aware of the significance that particular events will have by the novel's end, but we do know that whatever is happening is part of this narrative. Trivially, I think we know that, but I don't think you can squeeze anything from that stone. We provisionally understand its significance in terms of what has happened so far and anticipate that its significance may change over time. The way we experience it on the first reading may be different from the way we interpret it later, but the nature of the initial experience is already affected by what has come before and by the fact that because the dual perspective described by Bellman, the events we encounter are experienced as a part of something bigger. Similarly, in a life, the present is not experienced as a contextless moment, but as a time in an ongoing life. In this sense, its character is not independent diachronic perspectives in which I will argue matter for the questions of temporality and the good life. To see the nature and significance of this effect, it's helpful to consider Bellman's discussion of creatures who have only a momentary perspective at the end of well-being and time. He concludes calculations concerning the welfare of the person with those concerning the welfare of a cow, which presumably can't take that diachronic perspective on itself because of its inability to take a whole life view. He says there's no welfare pertaining to the extended periods in the life of this cow, and so we should conclude that the cow can fare well or ill only at particular moments. This means that the totality of a cow's life can have no value for the cow in a way the totality of a human life can for a human. This presumably also implies that the moments of a cow's life are markedly different from the moments of a human person's life. Considering the totality of one's life is not something that occurs only when we step back and reflect on our life trajectories. It's baked into the momentary experience of everyday life. Regret for the past, fear or excitement about the future, and awareness of the finitude of our life are ongoing background conditions against which we experience the present, and this way the perspective of the whole life is part of what gives the temporally local experience of human persons its character. Bellman often refers to well-being in the present as momentary well-being. Presumably he does not mean this literally. A moment is not a duration that allows for any robust form of well-being. That's a claim Bramble also makes, which I think maybe I have in here somewhere. I don't, maybe I have. Yeah, it's not in there as an argument. This is back when I was taking notes without arguments. This is really a no credible theory argument. Maybe. So where do we put the no credible theory argument? It's against atomism. No, it's against temporal well-being. Where do we have? Okay. Do we put this under atomism whole? Or moment, whatever. Whole life, wild person. This is going under well-being in time. May also go under whatever. And maybe we shouldn't call it the no credible theory argument, because he's really got no credible theory arguments against hedonism, desire, satisfaction, and objectivist theories, and what we're looking at here is his argument against hedonism. But we can put that all in this one argument. Maybe we just copy and paste this whole. Whoop. Where is some? How do I make a key work? Oh no, this doesn't have a key work, sorry. Now how do I put into Hypernomicon that Schechtman agrees with one little bit? And maybe make this a position. That moments are too short. It's a position nested under no momentary well-being. No, this doesn't get the whole argument. Maybe I copy and paste all this. I think maximalism doesn't hurt us here. I don't know if this all should be here, but I shouldn't really call this a moment, but an argument. It's just her statement. But I don't know. We're about to see in a moment if we should copy and paste this. Let's keep reading. A moment is not a duration that allows for any robust form of well-being. It's not clear that desire could be experienced in a moment, let alone fulfilled or frustrated. The interests of now are typically things like binge watching a favorite. She's doing desire satisfaction too, so we should copy and paste that from the. You know what? It's not. We're deleting this. And that goes there too, because it's also about that. And now back to Schechtman. Okay, it's not clear how desire could be experienced in the moment, let alone fulfilled or frustrated. The interests of now are typically things like binge watching a favorite show, enjoying a third cocktail, or missing a strategically important business meeting to walk in the woods on a splendid summer day. When we focus on these interests, we're not talking about the interests or subject of the moment, but of considerably longer duration. While may well be the case, the simple rational self-interest theories against which developments argue when refer to well-being of persons at times as the equivalent, all those I mentioned, blah, blah, blah. The actual conflicts we experience are between the present, which can be a different directions in life as a whole. Okay, so that can all get copy and pasted. I don't have page numbers because this is a preprint. This is something Feldman explicitly recognizes. He begins time and well-being by knowing that person can fare well either over an extended period of time or at a particular moment, pointing out that we speak of persons having a good day, a good year, or a good life. Presumably none of those points can be reduced to the sum of well-being of moments that make it up on Feldman's account, but reference periods of their life are absent from a subsequent discussion. It's not clear, therefore, whether he believes that day or week is a narrative trajectory of its own, if not what we are to say about well-being over these intervals. Moreover, each of these intervals can count as the present relative to others with respect to the conflict between present and long-term interests. I might have something I wish to accomplish today, but right now I feel like reading my murder mystery instead of getting to the task at hand. I may have plans for this week that require me to accomplish something particular today, but also wish to spend the day walking in the woods. The vacation I want to take now may make this month infinitely more tolerable, but may make the narrative trajectory of my college years worse. Once we recognize that the period we're contrasting with the whole life must be of long enough duration for the notion of well-being to apply, the suggestion that the context of calculating its interest can be screened off entirely from other elements of life with which it might interact becomes questionable. So this is not the view that moments are too short. It's the view that because moments are too short, X, Y, Z. So I'm not sure how to characterize that yet. We can, of course, designate the endpoints of a temporal interval and make a calculation of someone's well-being in terms of contact, pain, or leisure or desires fulfilled or unfulfilled over that interval. This assessment might as well suggest be all that there is to say about a cow's well-being in the present, and present well-being may be all there is for cows. Actually, I think these claims require more investigation, but grant them for the sake of the argument. For humans, however, even though current levels of pain and pleasure, satisfaction and dissatisfaction are undoubtedly parts of our well-being at the time, they are not the whole of it, or at least the relevant kinds of pain and pleasures, fulfillments and discontents are going to be more complicated in ways that necessarily make reference to the fact that they're part of an ongoing life. The context of the life in which the present occurs cannot be screened off entirely without stripping away much of what constitutes human life well-being, or what constitutes human well-being at a time. The kind of temporally local experience and interests humans have do in fact make reference to such context. It's not to say, of course, that the details of each moment of life directly affect the character of each other moment. Many details of life may be in some sense out of play in our current experience, just as an earlier subplot may be out of play when we focus on major plot developments while reading a novel. The cat is moving. I've argued elsewhere, however, that human experience is framed overall by an understanding that one is living a single finite life, and claim that background awareness of this general fact awareness affects the character of our experience even when we are very much immersed in the present, that is, some relatively short interval of time. This is the force of the idea that being in the present is a qualitatively different experience for humans than it is for cows, because this phenomenology includes awareness of suspending or backgrounding the extended view, rather than simply the absence of such a perspective. An example of this effect can be found in Velleman's account of why we tend to see events that occur later in life as bearing more significance than those that occur earlier. His suggestion is that we tend to give more weight to setbacks or triumphs that occur later in life because at that point more of our life story is already fixed, and so there's less opportunity for the immediate implications of what happens then to be altered or reversed by what comes later. Events that occur later in life therefore tend to tell us more about what kind of life it would be overall than those that occur earlier, to the extent that we do experience our life failures and successes more acutely than those earlier in life. For this reason, however, the life stands and what it implies is integrated into quality of experience at the moment. In feeling disappointment so acutely, I am implicitly or explicitly recognizing this setback as one occurring late in my life, and so is one I am unable to be unlikely to be able to undo. The intensity of my temporally local interest in succeeding compared to that at earlier times depends on my contextualizing it to the life stage I'm in, and the significance of the fact for my whole life. The two cannot be completely disentangled. There may be some relatively rare instances where this background awareness of living an ongoing finite life is fully absent, under the influence of certain psychoactive drugs, for instance, or during meditation or in a sensory deprivation take. I'm extremely grateful to an anonymous referee for pointing out the need not to overstate the dependence of every temporally local experience on the perspective of the whole life, and for helping me see the need to clarify the claim I'm making here. What I want to say is influenced by a temporally local experience, at least most of the time. What I want to say is influencing our temporally local experience, at least most of the time. It's not everything that's transpired in our lives or is expected to, but rather a more general awareness of living a life, which provides context for present experience. It may clarify to briefly discuss two examples of the referee's offers cases in which positive experiences aren't connected, has a larger perspective. The examples of drug experiences and adult pursuits, such as playing games when one knows one should be working. I see the former as potentially a genuine example of broader perspective being absent. The latter, however, is not knowing that one should be working in a connection to the broader perspective and ultimately to the background awareness. Is a connection to the broader perspective and ultimately to the background awareness that there's only so much time in life and it's being spent now playing games instead of doing something else. Playing games may be absolutely the right choice to make in terms of pursuing a good life, and background awareness of the broader perspective need not interfere with enjoyment of such pursuits. Indeed, part of the pleasure of playing games is often that one isn't doing it instead of working. It's a respite. Similarly, part of the pleasure of vacation is hiatus from routine. This is all perfectly consistent with seeing it as part of one's ongoing life. In fact, it can only have this character if it does include that perspective. Yeah, I mean, the referee clearly should not have said this bit. This bit alone would have made the point. Anyways, I have no issue with allowing this. What I wish to emphasize, however, is that the character of such experiences is different from the kind of living in the present we're talking about when we decide to take a dream vacation, even if it will cause financial difficulties later, or to explore a relationship that may well lead to heartache. To the extent that part of the value and pleasure of being in the now is that it allows us to step outside of our demands of long-term goals and commitments that involve recognizing ourselves, at least implicitly, as beings that have such goals and commitments that we are allowing ourselves to suspend. The metaphoric perspective is useful here. One way of changing perspective is through a shift in the intention of focus. In looking at a forest scene, I might focus on one flower or a patch of sunlight, letting the rest of the scene blur into the background, or I might take in the scene as a whole. In reading a novel, I might concentrate on the beauty of a particular passage, or I might be swept away by the plot and keep my focus on the level of unfolding events. And living my life as a whole, I might immerse myself in the joys or worries of the present, or think about my life as a whole and how it's progressing. Either way, the attention I'm paying is being paid right now. When I step back to think about my whole life, I don't actively step outside of time. When the temporal whole and temporally local is foregrounded, both are present in my overall experience. The intelligibility and character of now is understood differently because of this background awareness, just as a paragraph from a novel would be experienced quite differently if it given completely out of context than it would be in the course of reading the novel in which it was included. We can moreover step back to different distances with different effects, meaning that there are not just two but many perspectives at work implicitly or explicitly shaping our experience. It's in this sense that we hold multiple perspectives at once, and it's for this reason that I reject the claim of strong independence between the perspective of the present and the whole life perspective urged by Bellman. My suggested approach doesn't presuppose different subjects for each perspective, so while our experience is multi-perspective, not the experience of many subjects, what remains to discuss in what this implies about the good life. So, this, I think, basically summarizes, like, 90% of the thing, so this is going just in the work description. Okay. Reflecting on elements, observations, and my challenges to them. Suggest an alternative framework for thinking about temporal perspectives in good life. I conclude with a preliminary sketch of this alternative. The dispute between the whole life and live for today approaches is in some sense about the unit whose goodness should be pursued, and seeking a good life is that of the present self without the whole life. Elements suggest both are units whose well-being is pertinent to the welfare of a human person, but doesn't tell us anything about how to pursue well-being given that fact. He would, as I understand it, see this question as misposed. There are two incommensurate perspectives from which the question of welfare can be raised, and no more comprehensive perspective from which to raise the broader question. My challenge of elements of binary opposition between the momentary self and the whole life, together with my argument that different perspectives are not as fully distinct as he suggests, implies a way of thinking about a more comprehensive unit whose welfare can be evaluated and sought, and so a way of thinking about the good life for human perspectives that doesn't fracture the way elements suggest, nor require us to choose one perspective for our focus as the traditional approaches do. The alternative rests on a distinction between what I call the entirety of someone's life and following elements usage someone's whole life. So this distinction we can return to Velleman's implication of narrative in connection with the evaluation of our whole lives. In some ways, my arguments in the previous section suggest that the picture of narrative employed is oversimplified, at least for the purposes of my story. The narrative structure of life, as Velleman describes it, amounts to something like the plot of life story. Think about the evaluation of something as complex as a human life, however, a more robust understanding of narrative structure is called for. Okay, this is relevant to a paper I'm writing. No, it's not. Take it back. It'll be helpful to discuss what this means in the context of aesthetic valuation before applying its lessons to the case of a human life. Consider a novel. There's a straightforward sense in which the whole novel is the plot from start to finish. If I am to give a précis of the whole novel, that's what I had summarized. Either chapter or passage. There's another sense in which it's misleading to say that all there is to Moby Dick are War and Pieces of the plot. If we're evaluating these novels as aesthetic objects, a plot summary, no matter how detailed, is not going to give us what we need. We will want to look at the prose, zeroing in on particular passages that are especially salient or brilliant, at the characters and the way they develop, at the structure of individual chapters, and how they inform or to resonate with one another. We will want to understand themes that are exhibited not just by the plot, but also in individual sentences or descriptions of characters, and mutually reinforced by all these elements. A novel is a multi-dimensional object. The different dimensions can be distinguished and have different kinds of virtues that can pull in different directions. A brilliant piece of prose might ruin the flow or coherence of the plot, while confused plotting might diminish the luster of the passage. To understand or evaluate a novel, we're ultimately interested not only in the equality of these individual dimensions, but also in the ways they inform or interact with one another. This means that critics need to look at the novel from multiple perspectives involving different scales. When they do, the alternative perspectives will interpenetrate one another. As commonplace, like great work of art is one which we can keep returning and each time find something new. Our reason for this is that each engagement from whatever perspective enriches whatever perspective we take when we revisit it. Having pondered the overall structure of the plot, one can appreciate in a new way how an individual passage contains the dimensions of the whole. Having spent time unpacking an especially rich paragraph, the significance of the overall plot is better understood. Each perspective once taken. No, but okay. Each perspective once taken adds something to the others, so that what emerges goes beyond any particular perspective, even that of the whole, which is no. There's no whole perspective, which is itself only one of the main perspectives we can take on work. In the aesthetic realm, what I'm calling the entirety of the work is a mutually interactive set of perspectives, the experience of complexity to which they give rise. Fine. In a good work of art, the different elements and perspectives support and illuminate each other, producing an experience of a unified work with aesthetic coherence or cohesion. In a bad work, they may be diffuse and unconnected, or undermine and confuse each other. Either way, there's experience of the entirety in which they remain distinct but independent, but which is not reducible to any single perspective or even the collection of them all. Because we take multiple temporal perspectives on our lives and because they inform and influence on each other, we can distinguish between the whole life and the entirety of a life along the lines of that between a whole novel and the entirety of a novel. There's no whole life. The experience of the entirety of life is found in what emerges from the multiple temporal perspectives, and the entirety is not the entirety, let alone the whole, and also those are the synonyms. So what emerges from multiple temporal perspectives we inhabit is they inform and alter one another, evaluating life like evaluating an aesthetic object, will thus involve considering it from multiple perspectives, not just once or in succession, but regularly shifting back and forth, foregrounding the view in temporal from different temporal foregrounding the view from different temporal perspectives at different times in ways that make each somewhat different for having experienced the others. The spirit of my proposal here in this picture of good life it generates is very much in the spirit of the picture of good life proposed in Valerie. Tiberius's wonderful work on relay questions of perspective, e.g. 2005. I don't have space to give this work its due, nor to discuss the points of overlap and divergence. While I know that Tiberius discusses different practical perspectives rather than temporal ones, motion might allow that different perspectives influence one another. It's not the main focus of her work. I don't know Tiberius very well, but I think different practical perspectives is like 1,000 times more convincing than this stuff. But whatever. So far, the question of what makes a good novel or a life has been discussed from the point of view of a critic, valuing completing life or work or art in its entirety. This is the point of view. This is the point of view to which Velleman's analysis is addressed. It's important to remember, however, that a good novel is not just one that rewards critical valuation. Good novels shall also be good to read. It is in the context that the role of temporality is perhaps seen most clearly. It's a common characteristic of many of the best novels that were simultaneously anxious to see how things turn out. I couldn't put it down. I wish that the process of their unfolding would never end. These two desires, although they pull in opposite directions, are usually connected. We care about how things turn out because we are invested in the characters and their vicissitudes. If we are not interested in the people and the events depicted as we read along, we will not be in a hurry to get to the end, but more likely just stop reading. Maybe. We do not have a read novel, at least not a good one, only to find out what happens at the end. If that's all we're after, we can read the outline summary or skip to the end. If we do that, we miss most of the substance of the novel and probably undermine most of our reason for caring about what happens. It's our engagement with the characters and our events which, through the way they're drawn into the details of the passage, we are drawn into details of the different individual passages and chapters, makes us anxious to know how things turn out in the first place. It's equally true, however, that the individual passages and events get their urgency and significance from the fact that they're part of the unfolding plot. Even the full details of the plot are not yet known to us as readers. In a good novel, the experience of reading through in time is rewarded and continues to be so after we finish the novel and can appreciate the entirety more fully. A good novel stays with you even when it's finished, not just because you now know the whole story, but because of the words, events, and characters that make it up. The entirety of a novel, in my sense of the term, cannot be grasped all at once, and it emerges only by experiencing the complicated ways in which the individual passages and plot, appreciated on their own, all inform or support one another. This doesn't need to be explicitly thought or articulated as a critic would. It's simply there in the inherent tension between omniscience and partiality, or the eternal and secular modes of the novel would describe. This is not, however, a tension that undermines the integrity of the novel. To the contrary, the tension is constituted part of the novel in its entirety. It's not difficult to find analogs of these phenomena in life, though there are, of course, important analogies. The simultaneously desire for time to speed up so that we can see how things turn out and slow down, so that what's happening never ends is common. We want our children to grow up. But also stay young for a holiday to come, but also for time of anticipation to stretch out, to receive a degree and start a career, but for school days never to end. The tension between the eternal and secular modes is in this way present in our lives. So as a novel and a good life, as a good novel, different perspectives inform and enrich one another in a way that gives them greater depth and significance at each time scale, yielding life worth living. Are these different time scales? You don't want your children to grow up and also to stay young from different time scales, or for holiday to come, but also from the interpreted time of anticipation to stretch out from different time. No, none of this is right. Because we are not like cows, as Velleman describes them. The sense of tension between omniscience and partiality described above is an inherent feature of our existence. Living good life, I suggest, involves managing this tension well. Of course, this will look somewhat different in life than a novel. I have no explicit account to give of exactly what it does look like, any more than there's a list of necessary sufficient conditions for being a good novel. It may help, however, to think about an example. Consider a common attitude, at least among those who enjoy their days at university, of wanting school to be over so the next phase of life can begin, but also not wanting to leave these days behind. I don't think I had the first one. I did not want college to end. Focusing too much on the desire to move on puts us in danger of failing to truly appreciate and experience those years as they're happening. Focusing too much on the school years will leave one unprepared for the inevitable transitions, not just in the sense of we have not planned what comes next, but also that provides no way to hold on to these years by integrating them in the broader whole, and so disconnects us from them more thoroughly than is necessary. This kind of interpenetration between shifting temporal perspective. I don't understand why they're temporal perspectives, except in the very trivial sense of being about things ending or continuing to. But those aren't temporal perspectives in the Vellman sense, I don't think. Describing the last paragraph shows the ways in which these tensions that never fully resolve may nevertheless be part of a harmonious entity. The recognition that my university days are preparing me for adult life and give them the significance that goes beyond what they contain outside of immediate context, one that's not experienced later, only experienced later when plans come to fruition or only when I reflect, but as a regular and persistent feature of the local experience. I wish to continue this interpenetration as best can provide encouragement and support for the periods when studies seem like a slog, while simultaneously reminding us that this period is limited, perhaps with the prospective nostalgia making me fond of the slog itself, not as a means of getting somewhere else, but as a part of the school years I will one day miss. This may allow me to enjoy and appreciate these moments all the more even as I look anxiously to my future. I acknowledge there are important discontinuities between life and literature. Some of these have been noted, but more emerge when we recognize that in living, we do not, as a reading, merely wait to see what happens next. We play a role in determining it. In this respect, our role is more like that of an author, and our question is how to lead a good life. This is an important role. We do not, however, have the same level of control over events in our lives that authors have over the events in our novels. We can't determine everything that transpires, and frequently do just need to wait and find out what life has in store for us. In the context of a novel, an author will need to move back and forth between planning for the book as a whole and the creation of individual passages, chapters, and characters. A plan is needed to get going, but the production of individual passages will almost certainly lead to revision of the plan. Rereading what is written so far will occasion some rewriting or reorganizing what's already written. This is the kind of work which brings the various elements, the kinds of harmonious relations that generate a novel, which is good in its entirety. The analogy is useful, but as previously noted, can only get so far. Authors of novels can literally strike or rewrite an earlier passage. We can't do this in the same way in our lives. The description of this gives one way in which temporal perspectives can influence one another. It does, however, suggest another way in which we can do something relatively analogous. We can revisit and re-engage the past via memory and take alternate perspectives via counterfactual thinking and imaginative projection into the future, actively shifting perspectives. The extent to which we give this thing's importance our cognitive functioning is a topic that has received a great deal of attention in cognitive neuroscience lately. In this way, we employ something like the feedback loop authors use in crafting a novel in our efforts to create a life that's harmonious in its entirety. Understanding this approach, unlike Vellman's, allows this approach, unlike Vellman's, to provide insight not only to evaluating good life but endeavoring to live one. To see how this works, consider not a happy university student described above, but instead a medical student who faces the prospect of needing to stay at university during a break and study for difficult and boring exams rather than taking an exciting holiday with friends. With Vellman's approach, the interests associated with the perspective are incommensurate, and there's no global standpoint from which to pursue. My suggestion is that in having multiple standpoints can find a means of addressing such conflicts with an eye towards a life that's good in its entirety. Longer-term perspectives, for instance, may be recruited to help mitigate the frustration and resentment of having to miss the trip. It'll still be disappointing, but with a lively evocation of the current moment. It's not just missing fun for tedious study, but as a movement on a trajectory towards a desired outcome, something not just known but experienced in having the long-term perspective. The student might feel satisfaction associated with the goal right now, alongside the disappointment as Lady Macbeth, anticipating her new station in life, feels now the future and the instant. In a way, the interest of the whole life are experienced as the interest now, leading to a more harmonious entirety. There are other possible outcomes, however. Maybe the focus on the broader view fails to energize or lighten the present, yielding nothing but deep despair and gloom that's become persistent and difficult to withstand. Such case may lead the student to reconsider whether it's worth being a doctor. She may take her current status as evidence that she does not really want to be a doctor at all, or she might continue to think that ultimately becoming a physician will be rewarding, or that a trajectory leading to such a career is a pleasant one for life, but nonetheless conclude that suffering depression and misery through most of her young adulthood together is such a blight that it'd make her life in its entirety better to quit medical school now. and find new long-term goals, even if doing so is risky and generates a fair bit of upheaval. In the first outcome, some tension persists, but compatible with broader harmony between present and longer-term perspective to improve her present experience. In the second, the student discovers not only tension but disharmony between these perspectives, which leads to a revision both of what she's doing now and the interests associated with longer-term perspectives. There are many other possible outcomes, depending on multitudinous details, which might involve different forms of compromise or reciprocal impact among the perspectives that could make life more harmonious in its relevant sense. Maybe she goes on vacation while recognizing that it may delay or dampen progression toward long-term goals because the life needs to be good to live as well as to evaluate externally. The general point is that in lives as they are lived, there is not a fixed long-term perspective and an unalterable present, which are sharply cut off from another. There are instead multiple interlocking perspectives that constantly inform and modify one another in ways that, if managed skillfully, establish harmonious relations between them that make life better. This is not always possible to do well. Sometimes external events and limitations are so extreme that all we can do is try to make things somewhat better with luck. However, one can live a life in which one can't wait to get on to the next stage, but also wants the current one to go on forever, and about which one can feel satisfaction with respect to the entirety. This form of satisfaction is consistent with life, which ends with more to say and do. Lives don't have to be tied up in a tidy way, or end on a high note to be satisfying and meaningful human lives. A good life is good to have lived through in a secular mode and meaningful in the eternal possibility allowed by the particular temporality of our self-experience. I'm grateful to participants in the conference, Time the Good Life, Philosophical Perspectives, May 2021. Especially wish to thank Eva Weber, Gusker, and Homer Steinfath for organizing the conference. Okay, so we copy and paste. Yeah, and that's all wrong, but it's wrong enough that this is just different built-in genres or whatever. Okay, that's everything I'm putting from this entire Necronomicon, I believe. So we're done, and this, I think we're not doing anything. We're done with this. We're done with this. The end. I think, maybe tomorrow or something I'll start reading, rereading this. So if I do, it'll be online and you can join me.